All
Welcome to
right, this is exciting.
CareLab.
Thank you for
So,
having me.
so we have a really wonderful guest here with us today. We have Chad Flores. We're very excited to have him. He is the director of spiritual services at Athena Wellness Consultants, and he is our guest today. Throughout the last 20 years, Chad's provided companionship, bereavement support, vigil sessions, and ceremonial services to over 1,000 patients as a hospice volunteer and a death doula. And he's here to talk with us today about this very interesting subject of death doulas and what they do. But before that, we've got to ask a silly question.
We do, and I'm not ready to answer it, but go ahead.
Okay, this one's not that bad. It's not that
I'm on
bad.
pins and needles. Come on.
Yeah, okay, it's not. No, this is a good one. So this is kind of a throwback to caregivers dilemma, actually, when I used to always ask people for like their favorite song that they would recommend to caregivers. So what is your like go-to song that you listen to, that you've been listening to right now when you need either like a pick-me-up or to feel motivated or just like to change your mood and like have a good time?
Man,
And I
you
don't
would
think she
ask
mentioned
this
that
at a
you got to go
time when
first,
I've
Chad.
been audio booking it for so long. I spend over 3 hours in the car every day, so like it's like my second academy. So like, I audio book a lot. But right now, like EDM, I need like non-verbal based music just to help me move sort of emotion, consciousness, just to navigate through these different states that I occupy every day. So like non-verbal based music is a great way for me to just obviously higher rate, get that sort of adrenaline going, get
Yes,
the
I
body
like it.
flowing, you know.
Brandy?
Okay. I hate favorites questions. Okay, so
Yeah.
let's just preface it with that. But I'm gonna give
Listen,
you
when
the
I
answer
asked
because
it,
I'm a good sport.
when I
You
asked
said
it, I
what?
was like, wait, Amelia, you don't have one because there's like 20,000 of them.
Correct.
Yeah, so
Because I use music to modulate my mood. And so,
same.
like, my playlists are for the mood at the time, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or the mood I want to be in. So, picking one is hard, but I'm going to pick Made Away by Travis Green because no matter what is happening, when I listen to that, it gets me emotional and grateful for all the things God has done for me in my life. And so, it doesn't matter what kind of mood I'm in, that song always makes me feel that. So, I'm gonna give that as my answer.
I love it.
That's a good one. And same, I like music is how I modulate myself. So if I need to pick me up, I'll turn on a song. If I need to like calm down, I'll turn on a specific kind of music. Um, so I'll tell you, I went down a bit of a rabbit hole this morning uh, with like Spotify suggestions because it started when I was exercising this morning, and like the workout that I was doing, they played Freedom by oh gosh, it's not Beyonce. It's by, oh my gosh, I'm gonna have to go actually look at this.
Is it the Rage Against the
Michael,
Machine version?
no, listen,
That's the
there's a
three of
million
mine.
songs
So, yeah.
called Freedom too, so that's not helpful. It's the one from the guy from Wham.
Oh goodness, yeah, that's beyond my
Can't help you.
territory.
Can't
Okay,
help you.
hold on. Google's gonna help me. Uh, Wham, pop duo, George Michael. Thank you. Freedom
Okay.
by George Michael, which is such a throwback. But I was like, this is a great song. So then I added that to my playlist. And then it took me down this other, like, this whole different tunnel of music. So I added like Kiss by Prince, which, by the way, if you need to pick me up, just listen to anything Prince, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Just turn on Prince, probably. I added a bunch of things, but I should stop answering this question now because I'm doing a terrible job.
We're
You
learning a
gave
I'm
us
sorry,
lot about
everyone.
you right now.
I did give an answer. Listen, the sad thing about it is I'm the one who asked the dang question.
So you already knew what you're supposed
Correct.
to do, and you still continued. You
And
should
I
have gave yourself an out and said, like, what are your top 3 songs?
yeah. Well, I think I would have screwed that one up too. But anyway, That's my final answer. Is just turn on anything Prince.
It's a
Perfect.
good answer. It's a
There you go.
good answer.
Okay.
Mhm.
Let's dig into the topic at hand here, though. Chad,
Alright.
thank you again for being here with us. Can you tell us what the heck is a death doula?
Well, first off, I would just like to give a little praise your way. I've known you for quite some time, and so to see you go from trying to figure out how to set up marketing booths at events to having a podcast and a caregiver training service, I mean, the evolution has just been amazing to watch. So I'm super excited to share this space with
Oh,
you.
thank you so much. Can I say, Chad, do you remember when I couldn't figure out how to post on social media? Chad actually taught me. He was like, no, you have to go here. And I'm like, what?
What?
Oh, like literally being able to create a post?
Or like
To be fair
respond
to
to
you,
one, or
technology it's exponentially quick these days. So a matter of years is like forever in tech age. So
That's true.
yes,
yeah.
we were
I,
trying to figure out how to make posts together when it was a new thing, but it has definitely evolved so quickly at this point that it seems ridiculous. But
yes.
humble beginnings, and look at
Very.
your success. You know what I'm saying?
Yes. Thank you. Thank you very much, Chad.
So to sort of snap back into the question, I would first like, if it's okay, one of the big things that we do as a doula is to honor, the people that we work with. And this opportunity for me is built on a number of different synchronicities. And one of those is the founder of Athena Wellness. Her name is Sandra Fendoni. And the whole genesis of her company is to honor her mom and dad. So I thought it would be, proper for me to at least spend just a brief moment to honor Carol and Chick Fendoni. Without them and without the opportunity that Sandra had to walk them through their end of life, she wouldn't have had the impetus to find me on LinkedIn and basically pluck me out and hire me professionally to do the death doula thing for her company. So I just wanted to honor her mom and dad, Carol and Chick Fendoni. My maternal grandmother, Beatrice Phillips, and my paternal grandmother, Rosa Banda Flores. They are all very important to who I am and why I'm here in this moment with you. So I just wanted to honor them. So at the core of what a death doula does is to figure out the best way to help a family and a person transitioning to honor their life and to advocate for their experience so that it can be as optimal as possible. The term sort of that we're familiar with is like a good death, but what does that really mean, right? So a lot of what we start off doing is trying to explore, where a family and where a patient is at. So it can be a variety of things. A death doula can be someone who sets up a sacred space. Like I have a friend that just does floral arrangements, but she likes the term of being a doula, right? You have people that will set up a space with like essential oils and just, LED candles. How do we make something sacred? And then you have someone like me that kind of goes a little bit deeper. But that's because I've spent 20 years doing it, and I think that one way to sort of contextualize it is to kind of figure out how I got started. It's kind of funny that we're here in Collin County, basically, and that's where I got my start. It was in community college, Collin County Community College, for all those that are familiar. I took a death and dying psychology class. And as often is the case, they offer some sort of project to get away from writing a final exam or a final essay or taking a final exam. And I got that opportunity with hospice volunteer work. I could do 12 hours of patient support volunteer work, keep a journal, and then get out of that final assignment. And so that's what I did. And so eventually I ended up becoming a bereavement counselor and then ended up doing vigil support volunteer work, which is where you're sitting with someone that's imminent. And I was doing that for 20, 30 hours a week. So I did that for roughly 10 years. And so that the bulk of this experience comes from that time where I'm just, I'm not at the bars, like there's a lot going on with my family. Like my mom is sick, so I'm taking care of her. And so like my creative outlet, oddly enough, is this volunteer world. And so I was doing 20, 30 hours a week, you're just sitting in the moment, and I think that that's really kind of where the doula education is so important right now. I think a lot of us don't have enough exposure to understand what to do, how to even to reflect, on our own mortality. And so really what a doula is doing is trying to help someone and their family process real time, oftentimes within a very short frame of time. what's going on. Um, I could keep kind of going into that, but I wanted to see if maybe that sparked a question. That way I'm not just sort of dominating the space here.
Listen, I have all kinds of questions. And I thank you for taking us all the way to the beginning of like how you came to here, because it wasn't just like a see a job posting and was like, oh, I think I want to do that, And so my question is, I've been in healthcare for almost 20 years, and I'm only just now hearing the term death doula in the past few years.
Mm-hmm.
And because you've been volunteering and working in hospice and in this space for such a long time, is the term death doula new and a new kind of discipline, or is it that it's just being repackaged that way, or I just didn't ever hear about it? Tell us a little bit more about that.
Well, just yeah, I mean it is having a sort of cultural resurgence right now, and I think that's because it's showing up in different pop culture television shows. But the practice itself has been around for time immemorial, right? Like in Aboriginal or shamanic cultures, they were called death walkers, people that would literally walk you through your transition. In like the Tibetan Book of the Dead, you have examples of Buddha, of monks basically chanting, someone who's going through the dying process, through the different levels of the underworld and into, the afterlife. You see the same in the Egyptian Book of the Dead. So like thousands of years, we've seen these practices evolve, you know, with the Black Plague. We had like the Ars Moriendi, which was like the priesthood trying to figure out how to basically take care of the dying and how to ceremonialize, you know, the process amidst just numberless deaths every day. So like, how do we approach this? Like you get the masks and you get all the, so like it really comes down to focusing on different cultural sort of time period or time frames. But the practice itself has been around for so long. Death doula, I think we have this sort of direct parallel with like a birthing doula, someone who brings in life, and then a death doula as someone who helps take or transition life from this to the next. And it can be, and this is kind of where the specialization of a doula is sort of at the forefront of the focus here, because like it can be a variety of different things. Like I have a specialization in actually being there with them and oftentimes walking them through either through prayer work or through, if you're familiar with like different sort of forms of energy work. Some people like you to approach it energetically. So like we're dealing with consciousness here, right? A lot of the times what we're dealing with in care, like hospice care, home health, etc., it's just the physical body. But there's so many different layers. So, but it all comes down to energy and consciousness. And so someone can basically tune into that and help someone transition from that perspective. And so it can go pretty deep really fast. But to kind of circle back without once again dominating, which is so easy to do because I'm so passionate about it.
I love it.
The term itself is just coming back. I think people are scared of the term because it has death in it. They're curious about it because of a doula and they know the birth side, but they don't understand how it could be tied into death. I think people are preferring end of life specialist as opposed to death anything, because our culture is so caught up in being fearful and anxious of dying that we don't think about it. And so if you say death, it just freaks you out, you know? So, yeah.
Why do you think that this is so important to help provide people as they like are transitioning? Why do you like, obviously you're so passionate about this. I love that. I honestly I could just listen to you talk about it for a really long time. Like what do you think is so important and necessary about this kind of work for people?
So I've had 3 conversations just this week. And the core sort of theme was that, are you angry when you get into these situations about what you see in this space? And what this basically is sort of anchoring in is the reality that oftentimes patients are being sort of hooked up to all the machinery and their life is being prolonged way past its organic sort of viability. And so like what that leads to is that the patient's sort of quote unquote good death is no longer being advocated for or even understood. And really they're getting caught up in sort of, you know, the technology and the sort of miracle cures that we always have hope for. And oftentimes that's because the family isn't able to accept, dying. They want to prolong the life of their loved one beyond what the loved one actually wants, right? And so what we're dealing with is sort of the family dysfunction, you know, because we don't think about mortality in our culture, generally speaking. When we're approached with a hospice sort of 3 days or 2 weeks or 6 months, like it's such a small amount of time to do a life's work of processing, that honestly what ends up coming out is all the fear and the anger, you know and what that looks like. And estate planners, they love what we do when we work together, because they can bring me in early on to basically iron out all the dysfunction, so that as we're approaching end of life, the family's not arguing about the TV or the house or trying to get into the will or the money. They're not focused on the possessions. And to kind of circle back to Sandra Fendoni, like, she was having a hard time at the beginning because she realized in her processing, her parents had basically all their life had been sort of, contextualized into possessions and material things, and not much honor or time had been spent processing their life and the meaning that they created. And so what we end up having is families that haven't expressed what was meaningful about their loved one. They haven't said the things. They haven't even had time to process what it means. And so what that looks like post-death is the grieving process is that much more sort of intense for them, because they have all the sort of regrets. If I could have had clarity of mind, I would have known to express this. I would have said or done this. And so the role of a death doula is to come in and basically facilitate that as early as possible. Part of what I do is I'm also a death coach, like a life coach, right? So like, you bring me in, and oftentimes we can do this without a terminal illness. Like, if you're keen to just think about this in your 20s, let's do it. I think the sooner the better, because what we're trying to do is optimize the space for that when you are passing, everyone is harmonious. One of the things you learn as a volunteer, and obviously with your experience, is that as the senses start to go in the dying process, hearing is one of the last ones to go, right? So let's kind of have a harsh reality check here. If you have a patient that's dying and around them is dysfunctional family dynamics, and you hear all the bickering and all the sort of, toxic comments and the emotional sort of lashing out, and that's all you're surrounded with, that's not, quote unquote, the good death that we're striving for. And families are so uneducated that they think that the family, even in cases of like Alzheimer's and dementia, they think that the family member no longer can hear them or understand them. And I can tell you that's not the case. Anyone that's intuitive in this space can know that the person involved is picking up on all this information, and they're experiencing the anguish and the anxiety and the wish for other things. So like, I think that that's really where I'm being thrown in the most, is just to help iron out these dysfunctional dynamics and to really be there for the patient. I'll kind of stop there because we probably have another question, but that can continue on into other things, and I assume we will.
Hey there, it's Amelia. Listen, I am so thrilled to have a great resource like Ask Sammy as part of the CareLab team, and here's why. It's a game changer for aging in place because it makes it so simple. All you do is ask. Just type in your question or even tell Sammy what the problem is and get tailored solutions. Everything from innovative adaptive equipment to comprehensive resources. It's a great way to become more empowered, to live more independently, and to live with greater confidence. And my favorite thing about how Ask Sammy works is it's deeply rooted in dignity and practicality. So whether you're a fellow therapist, a care partner, or someone who's seeking solutions for themselves, visit www.asksammy.com. We're going to link it in the show notes so you can find it there. Start making home more accessible today. Now, back to the show.
You brought up something interesting, was that financial management or wealth management appreciates when you're involved. And so that made me think, well, first of all, it makes total sense. But the question I have really is, how do you see death doulas being accessed? So like, you work for Athena Health, and so I've seen it happen as part of hospice. That makes sense. You're at the bedside. But to be engaged at like the wealth management stage, or with a 20-year-old who's not dying but thinking about death? Like, tell me, how are the ways people might access a death doula?
Well, through platforms and opportunities like
Oh,
this. I think that right now with the resurgence, we are educating, having the conversations. There are things like death cafes. I don't know if you've heard that before.
That is
People
all
will
new to me.
set up shop, sometimes just like at a coffee shop or a lab, like a luxurious restaurant, and they'll invite people just to show up and just eat and have conversations about dying. There are cool little tools like the end of life or death decks. I don't know if you've heard of those, but it's basically card decks that have been created that have topics. It's sort of like Cards Against Humanity, right? Where you have these topics that are supposed to elicit responses and get a
mm-hmm.
conversation going, but it's geared towards the end of life space. So you have tools like that. You have little toolkits that help you understand what we even look like essential oil wise, how do you set up a sacred space? Basically just ways to sort of go into the conversation and begin just thinking about it. I think ultimately you're seeing us being used as volunteers primarily, word of mouth. Obviously I was found on LinkedIn because I identify as a death doula as, my occupation. And so that's how Sandra found me. I had another person reach out. They were having a presentation in Florida and the topic of death doulas came up and someone found me on a registry, a national list. So I think it just depends on who's looking for the information and where it's accessible, the most. And I think right now what you're providing to the community is probably the best avenue at this point, because we're digesting information at a rapid rate and podcasts are the way to go, audiobooks, etc. But generally speaking, before sort of all of this, it really was just word of mouth or showing up as a volunteer and not identifying like, hey, I'm Chad the Death Doula and I'm here to support you. It really was just being in the space and sort of, operating as such,
Can you talk a little bit about what the difference is maybe between hospice care and having a death doula? Because I think
Ooh,
that that's can be like a confusing distinction.
correct. Uh, the most simple way to look at it is that hospice care is going to be the clinical side of things, taking care of pain, trying to create comfort as optimally as possible. You're going to have, psychosocial support through the social worker and the chaplain, you know, and so all these work in tandem to take care of the basic needs of the patient. I think the way that I approach the conversation when it comes to this topic is that it's sort of like a battleground, right? Like I'm the one that will go through it with you. And not to say that a social worker, a chaplain, or a loved one wouldn't or couldn't, but like I'm able to spend as much time as is necessary, to go as deep as possible with you, you know. Whereas if I'm being funded by, an insurance, I may only have a limited number of time, you know. And it's sort of hard to, like if you think about like an IDG meeting, right? It would be sort of hard to make what I do hyperclinical, because we're dealing with things that sometimes can't be quantified. Like if I'm helping a patient that is nonverbal and my body has been fine tuned enough to pick up on pain cues or to know emotional cues of what they're going through, it's going to sound like the most woo woo kind of stuff to someone who's a materialist sort of science, person. Like they're dealing simply with the mechanics of the physical body, and when it stops functioning, that's the moment of death. Consciousness no longer exists. Like there's no more sort of spiritual component to it. It's just time of death. It's done. You know, whereas someone from my background that's working with energy and consciousness primarily, you understand that there's something that's transitioning and that still is lingering around that can be worked with post death, right? And so I think that if I've had the conversation with the patient and their family to know where their leanings are, then you know how to approach it, from a spiritual perspective. If they're Christian and they had certain archangelic sort of, beliefs and sort of leanings, then we know how to set up a sacred space to help guide their spirit or their soul into their next life based on that framework, and that's something that's just deeper and a little bit more extended than what you might get in a hospice setting, but I think that optimally that we work in tandem. I've had experiences where hospice volunteer coordinators or even hospice organizations are kind of scared about working with a doula Or maybe they've had a death doula come in and just try to do too much, just a little extra, right? It's sort of like the Reiki healer that wants to announce that I'm a Reiki healer in every context and can I do Reiki work on you? Sometimes you just need to be there and just operate as whatever you identify with without trying to interject it into a conversation because it's unknown, you know? So like knowing how to operate, I think is the best way to work with a hospice group. But I've also had instances where, you know, I've had hospice groups have to have emergency IDG meetings to figure out whether or not it's cool for me to come back because I've helped expedite, you know, a death. And they were worried about census numbers. Like if Chad's coming around and we're losing patients because he's doing this death doula thing, which is freaky to us, you know, without understanding what's really going on, like, is it okay? You know, we got to keep people in the beds, right? We got to keep, you know, our operation funded. And so education is just so important right now because I think people think that a death doula is someone who has their finger on the pulse of life and death, you know, and that's why it's freaky to them. It's sort of like, you know, did you hear the story about the cat that would travel to all the different rooms? And if the cat traveled to the room of a patient, that patient would die within 24 hours. Did y'all ever hear that story?
No.
So there's a number of these sorts of stories where there's an animal or some sort of an occurrence where if it shows
Are
up,
you saying you're the cat?
well, people think that I'm like the cat. If I visit, then they're going to pass, like, you know, and that can be possible. Yes. If the sort of portal, so to speak, is open and the patient really is ready and everything is just aligning and you just need a little extra help, then sure, I can be of service there. But like, I'm not going to walk in and just like, oh, there they go, you know, and I think that's kind of the simplistic way that it's looked at because it creates so much fear and anxiety because once again, you're dealing with something that is a huge unknown. You know, we are built to focus on life, you know, the birth of a baby. We're going to create a whole room. We're going to have the crib, the toys. We're going to do all this stuff, but we never spend any time even thinking about death. It just freaks us out, you know. And so like anything associated with the term, it's a huge unknown and people don't know how to process. They don't even want to process. And so like it's easy to project all that fear and anxiety onto someone who's doing this sort of work, even if you're offering it as volunteer time, you know, like it still just is freaky to them.
So the interesting thing about what you just said is that everybody does only two things the same. We all are born and we all die.
Correct.
And we spend all of our effort and energy on the birth because that's the fun part and it's bring a new baby into the world. And so in juxtaposition with like a birth doula, I liked what you said a little bit ago in which you're there as essentially an advocate and the person who's going to go through this with the least amount of complications or ties with the person who's actually dying. And like that's what a birth doula does, right? They're not delivering the baby. They're not cleaning the room. They're not doing any of the other stuff and have any of these other goals. The only goal is to help the mother be as comfortable as possible to do the best job she can to birth the baby.
Correct.
And so in a similar context, you're helping the person who is dying to be able to go through whichever framework they want to go through, but go through it and get to this other side, whatever the other side is in their opinion. And so this is a big unknown because we don't do a lot of this. And it's okay if there's no answers. It's just an honest question, not like pushing back on anything. But is there any research or any studies that talk about like how people experience death or like how soon they might die after engaging with a death doula or somebody on this continuum? It's not a continuum. I mean, like not the word death doula, like you were talking about.
Yeah.
People have been doing this work since ever because we've been dying since ever.
Correct.
So like, do we have any research or studies or just like information to know like how this impacts us?
Well, I think so. There are huge rabbit holes on YouTube right now, and a lot of people are very sort of fixated on NDEs or near-death experiences or even out-of-body experiences. And obviously, we have a lot of literature coming out about people that say they've died or had moments of sort of near-death experience where they went to these like either hell or heaven or hell and came back and basically tell you the landscapes. But like we have so much literature on, you know, at least clinically speaking, research-oriented literature on out-of-body experiences and near-death experiences. You know, even with the sort of, you know, the resurgence of like psychedelics right now, Like a lot of research has been done on DMT and what happens to people, during those experiences. And the sort of connecting point there is that, the brain produces DMT organically, and it's known to basically, at the time of death, your brain basically just, in a sense, shoots out all this DMT into your mind. And so
What's DMT?
it's basically like a psychedelic,
Okay.
so like it's basically helping it, in a sense, it's creating a landscape of sort of conscious awareness that exists outside of the body.
Mm.
And I'm trying to understand how to explain it simply for people that don't understand. I would look into that. So Rick Strassman is one of the primary researchers into that, and basically it ties into the dying experience because we basically are flooded with all of this sort of information as we are going through the process of transitioning from our physical body into our sort of conscious oriented spiritual body, depending on your framework, right? And so like that sort of in between, that limbo state is really what we're getting a lot of findings into right now with that sort of research. But once again, I mentioned like the Tibetan and the Egyptian Book of the Dead. There's a lot of people that have spent time researching these sort of different modalities of what happens and how can we help navigate it, But the NDE research literature, I think, is the most interesting, because you're having these people that are experiencing being on like a surgeon's table, and they're able to basically come out of their body and look down on the surgery itself as if like from a security camera in the corner of the room, and coming back to conscious awareness of hyper like awareness of the specifics of their surgery that they wouldn't have known under anesthesia, right? And so like that's just a simple example of what it looks like. But like you have all this wild sort of like, how did they know this if they were under, or how did they know this if they were clinically dead for 3 minutes? Like what happened? And so there's a huge body of just different anecdotal sort of evidence about what happens. And so you juxtapose that with all the research that like a Rick Strassman has done. It just seems like there's so much that can be done in this space. But from a death doula, like what we're doing is we're sitting in those moments. And that's why I think it's important for us to really focus on what we're experiencing. Like if you think about like a Venn diagram between life and death, you have that middle ground, and what's going on when those two different forms of life expression are merging, that's what we're sitting in. We're basically downloading information in those moments. And so that's how you can fine tune your body to pick up on different cues, and you can receive downloads about what is going on in the dying experience and come out and journal it or write it, or use it to inform the way that you approach it later on. And I think that's ultimately what we're trying to do, is create a presence. Can you sit in this moment without trying to consciously think about what to say to fix something, or without trying to be fearful or worried about, where you're at in the will? Like how can we get everyone to be optimally present so that we can just be in this moment organically together and really just receive what we can receive,
CareLab listener, I have a question for you. If someone you love needed a caregiver, what qualities would you want that caregiver to have? You probably want them to be reliable, trustworthy, kind, maybe just a generally dependable and good person, right? Second question, would you also want them to be trained? I'm gonna guess the answer is a definite yes. Okay, third and final question for you. Do you think it matters who gives that training? Like, is it cool if it's just in your body, or would you want that person to be a qualified expert? Assuming you do, in fact, love this person who needs a caregiver, you probably want the expert, right? Well, that's what Higher Standards Caregiver Training does. Higher Standards Caregiver Training provides 100% occupational therapist-led training for caregivers. Caregivers get taught everything from gold standard foundational skills for transfers and daily living tasks, all the way up to how to deal with specific diseases and injuries. And most importantly, they are taught all of these things in a way that is practical and enhances the participation of the person who needs the care. And it actually protects the safety of everybody involved. Why? Because everyone deserves a higher standard. For a course for individuals or learning about training for care for organizations, find that information at higherstandardscaregivertraining.com.
I feel like I'm doing it again. So next question, please.
No, I think that's great. I feel like what you're saying, and I do have a question after this statement. I feel like what you're saying is really trying to facilitate that connection
Mm-hmm.
between everyone so that everyone can kind of feel what's going on together and be at peace. Is that sort of it in a simplified way?
In a simplified way, yes.
What draws you to do this work? And like, we know how you came to do this work, but like, what is it that draws you into doing this?
It's my way to creatively process and express through my anger about what it actually is. Like when you think about a life, it's already difficult enough, right? The soul already has to go through so much developing through this life that to think and to experience that it's more tragic and shocking during death, it angers me, right? It's very frustrating, because no focus is given to the patient, typically speak. And when I say this, I mean like outside of taking care of the physical pain and outside of the work of a social worker and chaplain, not much else has been given to the patient to process their own dying process. They've been thrown into this, and there's so much unknown that they don't even have time to understand what it is they're about to go through. And it's like if we are honoring the birth, why aren't we honoring the dying? And I think that most of us have a belief system in the West that gives us an afterlife experience, right? And I think that a lot of the time, and this is what we experience, is that oftentimes we just believe something because it's a story that we've been told to believe. And if we haven't had a spiritual experience that anchors us in the reality of that belief system, when we're thrown into this unknown, we are scared because like every story breaks down. If we've identified with our physical body and that starts to disintegrate in the dying process, and then we have unprocessed intellectual, emotional, spiritual content, and no one's there to really help walk us through that, like the dying experience is oftentimes just it's not pleasant, and until the final moment where you see the peace, right? But like you think about all the suffering that's condensed into this very small frame of time of a dying process, like you just watch someone unnecessarily suffer, and it's because there's not been enough prep work for them in their own lives and not enough actual quality time and depth of work with them while they're going through it, you know and so like this is kind of what I mean, like when you think about a patient that has a family that is so caught up in arguing with each other, and when they're sitting there in that space, that's what they're focused on, and that's what the patient is soaking up. We kind of go back to like a baby will soak up what the parents do around it, right? And that's kind of how it picks up its cues. So like let's apply that to dying. When you've gone nonverbal and you're basically just sitting there, your experience is being saturated with what's surrounding you. And if you're in a hospital setting, which is super sterile and clinical, and you're surrounded by family that's bickering and arguing and they're just stressed, you're picking up on all that. It's not pleasant, you know, and you can't communicate what it is you want. Like, hey, I want you to tell me you love me again and tell me why this was meaningful. Hey, I wish I could tell you this, but I can't. Just I want you just to be here with me. They can't say that anymore, right? Or even when they are able to verbalize it, they can say that, but a family member can't necessarily be present to provide that because they're so caught up in their own processing, you know? So like that's why I'm angry, because I know it can be different, you know? And this ties into personal experience, obviously, because I've had family members that I've been with where I just knew that it wasn't optimal. And when I first started volunteering, I was in skilled nursing facilities where oftentimes no friends or family were coming because the
Yeah.
patient was completely alone.
Yeah.
And to even see the sort of abuse is a strong word, but to see the way that patients were handled and neglected in their care by the nurses or aides at the facilities that were often underfunded, and the patients were just another person on the route, on the sort of on the route, like the way they were, it was just so unnerving. And I was very angry that that would be the case. And I never realized that those realities existed. So I think that if I trace it back, the core of it was really just when I saw that the first time, I made it my sort of core mission to try to do what I could to be there with the dying, to at least offer some form of comfort. Even if that's just sitting there, holding their hand and just praying with them, just sitting there watching The Price is Right with them, whatever it is, just offering my time and my presence, and trying to sort of saturate a space with nurturing, compassion, love, all the stuff, right? And make that the environment, as opposed to an environment that's filled with all the stuff that we kind of just went over, which is unfortunately more often the case. Even when the best wishes and intentions are there by a family or by a nursing team or whatever the case may be, oftentimes the patient is just left to sit in these sorts of spaces. So.
And it feels not right to you. And so you're using
Correct.
your time and
It's not
energy
right.
to make that better, which makes total sense, because everything else that we do in life that we must do, we make it as enjoyable as possible, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, we must eat. If we don't eat, we will die. And
Correct.
so therefore we cook food. We spend all this $1 billion industry of like recipes and like all the ways to cook, enjoy, engage with food, because we have to do it. So we might as well make it more enjoyable experience. But because we don't like to deal with death for obvious reasons, we've neglected to create an experience around that is as pleasurable or as good as it can be, right? Like, no, I mean, it's the same thing for like, it's almost the same thing for working out. I'm going to use that example. So like, nobody really wants to get up and get working out. The end result is going to be beneficial to you and you do it. But the act of like working really hard and make your body work really hard is not necessarily pleasant, but we do all these other things around it in order to make it feel better and to make it enjoyable. You do it in a group, you get new clothes to do it, you do it on a beach because you think it's nice to watch and look and do, even though it's hard. But we have completely neglected to do that for death. Even though it's hard, we should still be managing it and trying to make it as pleasurable or as good of an experience as it can be for that person. And then by default, hopefully it's also making it a little bit better to deal with for the family.
Correct. And I'm just curious, why are we scared of death? Like, where did that come from? Why? And so I think that that's also the part of it, is that why are we scared of it? We say we have this belief system. Why are we scared?
I think that's really interesting. I've wondered that often myself, honestly, Chad, like, because we do have such a fearful and negative view of like death in our culture and society. We really, the focus is on living as long as possible, sometimes to the detriment of someone's comfort or quality of life, actually, right? Like we see this all the time, unfortunately. The only thing that I can come up with in my attempt to answer the question is that at some point death became so removed from the process of our regular lives. Like, it moved out of homes and into hospitals, where it was sort of like sterilized and made more clinical. And again, like, listen, folks, I am not an expert on what I'm talking about here. I'm literally talking as just like another person who has thought about these things.
For all of us, please. Yes.
Yeah. Like, I'm just a person who's thought about these things. But like, at some point, I mean, there was for probably most of our history, like, people passed in their homes with their loved ones, and it was a more, I'm guessing, normalized experience because it was something that we saw, right? Now, when someone passes, you might go most of your life without actually being there when someone passes. And so not only is it not present in front of us in a more kind of normalized way, it makes it much, much more scary because the unknown is scary. And, I think that the unknown is like the number one fear of anyone. Why don't you want to ride the roller coaster? Because I don't know what's going to happen. Why don't you want to speak publicly? Because I'm afraid that it won't go well, right? I just don't know. Why are you nervous on your first day of school as a kid? Because you're not sure, right? And so when we have no exposure to it, I think it just becomes scarier for us.
I think I agree with the second part of what you're saying the most. I think it's the unknown
Mm.
because okay, if you think about a baby, right, and you say I'm not going to argue in front of my kids or in front of my baby because that's probably not good for them, even though they can't tell me that they don't like when mom and daddy are arguing, right? But what you can see is that they are happier and they babble more and they come around you more because you are doing other things, right? You do get some experience about like, oh, I did this and this happened, but we don't get that with death, right? So like we have a death doula there or we have argument there. What happened to that person? Like we
Mm-hmm.
don't get that backwards feedback of like, oh, that was helpful. And so now I'm getting reinforced to continue doing it. And so we don't have that. And
Correct.
because there's so many different belief systems and it's just so unknown to us because nobody's coming back to tell us, okay, this was beneficial and this was not beneficial,
Mm-hmm.
that it just puts us in this state of like, I don't want to have to even deal with it.
Mm-hmm.
Plus, you're losing the person, right? We talk about like how important connection is. And so even if what they experience on the other side, like I come from a Christian background and faith, and so I believe after we leave here, it's going to be better. But
Mm-hmm.
that is better for them. It's not better for me. I still lost my loved one, right? They're not
Mm-hmm.
here with me right now. And so because we don't want to lose that connection, that also makes it a thing that we don't want to have to deal with, I think. And then we push it away even further. And now we've clinicalized it and made it so that
Mm-hmm.
it's something that we want to be as disconnected from as we can be.
Yeah, it's hard to reorient our focus when we're so fixated on the physical. Like our whole identity typically is tied into our physicality. But oftentimes we say that we ascribe to belief that we have a soul and a spirit that is eternal. And when we die, we will go into this eternal sort of landscape where all of us are still together and connected. And so, like, I think really it is having to come to terms with the disintegration of the physical identity. Like, if I'm no longer physically embodied in this reality, do I still exist? You know? And so there's that sort of dissonance there between like spiritually, we believe, yes, we are eternal, we are connected infinitely through love and through our, as you mentioned, Christ, we're connected through these different ways, and so like the fear, I think, is just when the physical body, like we have to come to terms with that. Like, do we still
Mm-hmm.
exist if we're not physically, in a sense, embodied? Or, and it's hard, you know? And I think that's really like, if you haven't, and that's kind of what I was meaning about the earlier comment, if you haven't had a spiritual experience that anchors you
Mm-hmm.
to give you a sense of certainty about what happens when you die, like it's hard. And so, like, the best way to prepare is to talk about it and to process it as soon as possible, whenever you have time. Like, it doesn't take a lot of time, really. It can, but like oftentimes as a death coach, that's what we're providing. Physically speaking, how would you like to be cared for? Where would you like to be? Do you want to be at home? Do you want to be next to nature? Do you want to be out in nature next to a spring or a pond? Or where do you want your physical landscape and body to be cared for? What are your sort of emotional, like how do you process the emotions and the thoughts? What sort of legacies do you want to create? Like if you're a grandparent and you have a grandchild that's going to be driving when you're not around, like do you want to create like a time released video or letter or something to pass on wisdom so that you can give them what you would like to tell them when they get their driver's license or when they graduate from high school or college? Let's map it out, right? And I think that alleviates most of the fear-based processing, because I think it comes down to, well, if I no longer exist, will I still be meaningful to those around me? Will I be remembered? Like it's sort of like almost egoic in a sense. We want to make sure that what we did in our life meant something, and we want to be able to be remembered. you know but spiritually, soul, mind, like we're all connected still. But I think it just comes down to the sort of the incarnation that we're currently in. We want to make sure that it meant something, and to be thrown into all that with 3 weeks to live, and for your family to be thrown into that, when
Mm-hmm.
like they're still soccer mom, they're still going through this, they haven't had time to even process what they want to do for the weekend, more or less, how to sort of encapsulate someone's life and communicate all that they wish they could communicate. Like, it's just, our life is so complicated and fast paced that it's almost like we don't have the ability to carve out just a space to process. So that's why someone like me can come in and just help you. It's like you provide that objective viewpoint. You can see everybody for where they're at, and you can help facilitate, you know, what they can do, and as much time as we have. Like I was like, hospice groups oftentimes use me as an emergency vigil support volunteer,
Mm.
and I had an experience recently where I was asked to go be with a family, and in the house when I walk in, there's like 12, 14 people there. The patient is on a hospital bed in the middle of like the kitchen living room area, and no one is paying any attention to him. Everyone's on their phones. There's two big screen TVs blaring movies that aren't even the same movie. So it's just like distraction upon distraction upon distraction, and nobody's even wanting to make funeral arrangements. They don't want to talk about it. It's sort of like what's called like word magic. If I speak about death, it's going to make it happen.
Mm.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to quicken it. So they weren't processing, they weren't talking, right? They weren't even saying meaningful things to the patient. They weren't nurturing physical touch. They weren't doing anything at all except just sort of occupying this awkward space where someone's actively dying and they're not really wanting to process or accept it. Right. So I was brought in to basically rapidly, provide a quickening process, so like, how do I help them start reorienting their thought process to say what needs to be said, to process the reality of it so they can start, you know, in a sense, having catharsis, right? As a family, let's process this. And I was able to do that in roughly 2 hours, right?
Mm.
You just have to come in and you have to know what to look for, and you have to be able to have the hard conversations, right?
Mm-hmm.
So oftentimes doctors, or like I mentioned, estate planners, they will utilize a death doula to do exactly that. It's like sort of like having the auditor come in, like, hey, you're going through this, but you're not taking care of any of these needs here. You're not even focused on the reality here. Let's figure out action items and let's do these things, right? So I don't know how I got off on that tangent, but I'll stop
I think
there.
that's really important though
Yeah.
that you
Yeah.
brought that out because it makes a ton of sense. And then everybody in the room knows that you don't have no side here. Like you literally just walked in off the street, but you have these skills. And so like you can help them get started talking without all the baggage that usually comes with families and relationships and all that stuff and like make the thing happen. I'm actually pretty impressed that you could take that group of people in 2 hours and get them to a point in which they were dealing with it, you know?
Hmm.
Because
Well,
they're actively doing everything not to deal with it, even though they dutifully showed up.
so this is just so when I mentioned, so when you've done something for as long as I have and you've sat in this space long enough, like you become finely tuned to pick up on all the cues, right? And so oftentimes what I do in my first moments is just sit there in silence and just observe and sort of intuitively, energetically pick up on all that's present in a given environment, right? And so this obviously is combined with an avid meditation sort of practice. Like there's a lot that I do to keep myself sort of stable and able to handle all the emotions, right? So like I have a deep meditative practice, a deep prayer life. So I basically have trained myself over 20 years to be able to do this in silence and to know how to basically take action based on the information that I receive, right? A mother's intuition knows when their child has been hurt. It doesn't matter how much distance is between them. So, as a death doula that spent so much time in this space, I can pick up on the cues of a patient and know how to take action, right? Even when a patient doesn't have any family and they can no longer verbalize, they can tell me what they need. I've experimented, right? Like a lot of this is experimentation. It's completely like unknown, right? But you can ask a patient, and you may have experience, right? Like you can ask a patient what they need, and if you're intuitive and receptive enough, you can pick up on what they're telling you they need, right? So like that's ultimately what we're doing is we're fine tuning a mechanism to receive information on how best to give someone what they need at end of life. Mm-hmm.
Well, I feel like we could continue talking about this for a long time because it's such a like rich subject, and frankly the end of life and death are topics that really deserve more time and more thought
Mm-hmm.
from all of us. What we do need to probably wrap up here, though. I want to be respectful of your time. Thank you so much for being here today, Chad. Would you tell people a little bit before we finish here, where can they find you? Where can they find information about death doulas that may be in their area? Maybe how can they get connected with services that, if they're listening to this and thinking, oh my goodness, that would be really, really helpful, like how can people access that?
Sure. Yes. Thank you both for having me. We could definitely keep going because, as you can see, the conversation it's multi-layered and there's so much.
I have at least 5 more questions,
I
but
mean,
we'll be here for 3 hours.
I still
So
feel like I haven't even clarified anything. Like there's so much more we could talk about. But yes, no, you can find me on LinkedIn primarily. That's where I get most of my connection points. People reach out for information. I'm happy to guide you on how to become a death doula, where to find doulas. I would go to the National End of Life Doula Association website, where there is a list of everyone who is a National End of Life doula, obviously throughout the United States. I would look into, like, the university, I think it's Vermont, has a university course on being a death doula. You have like the Conscious Dying Institute based out of Boulder, Colorado. You even have like the IAP Career College that Mark Cuban helped fund or started. I forget exactly what happened there, but they have an end of life doula certification, which is honestly where I got one of my certifications. Inexpensive, etc. A lot of the certifications are in depth and they require thousands of dollars. But really, what they're doing there is they're walking you through processing your own end of life process, so that you take on a terminal illness or like a diagnosis and you're like, I have this much time to live. Here's what I need to map out to make sure I have my good death. And you do that as a practicum. So typically that's what you're paying the thousands of dollars for. But if you just want the education, go to like an IAP college. There's a variety of other death doula sort of programs out there. But if you need any guidance at all, find me on LinkedIn, Chad Flores. I'll help guide you. If you need to volunteer, if you want someone to come sit with you, I'm there for that as well. But I just love being in the conversation, so thank you for having me. There's so much more that is not my specialty that could be talked about, academically, clinically, but I'm happy to have shared at least what I have in my experience base, and I just appreciate that you've had me here.
Well, thank you again so much for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for coming.
Let's do it again.
For sure. And dear listener and or viewer, if you enjoyed this episode, you made it all the way to the end, then please take a moment here to leave us a review, like, and subscribe. These are the best ways to make sure that other people who would benefit from hearing the information that we share right here on CareLab can get that information. Until then, we will see you next time right here on CareLab.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.